Not that there was a residual of evidential cases, but that the evidence was just so overwhelming.
Welcome to the Unrefined podcast, broadcasting live from the edge of ordinary. We're tuning the dial to the supernatural, the fringe, and the faith that won't fit the mold. If you want the full show, the deep cuts, the unfiltered conversations, grab your backstage pass at join.unrefinedpodcast.com. All right, you guys. Our guest today is no stranger to this show. He's a physician, researcher, and author who has spent years exploring some of the most fascinating and controversial questions surrounding UFOs, the paranormal, consciousness, and the nature of reality itself. His latest book, The Metaphysics of UFOs, he examines the evidence behind UAPs, alien abduction reports, high strangeness encounters, occult connections, and a growing debate between extraterrestrials and extradimensional explanations. We're diving into what the data says, where the mystery leads, and what the implications might be for science, spirituality, and our understanding on the world. Please welcome back to our show, Dr. Jonathan Kendall.
Brandon, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Man, I'm so excited. This book, when I read this book, I was telling you earlier, I was so stoked. It was the breadth of this book is what, and just the sheer amount of research, because, I mean, there's so much noise out there. We're recording this, and it'll be released around the time of all this disclosure mess, which you didn't really get a chance to go into in your book because you just missed that little weird window. And the movie just came out and all that. And it was refreshing to read this book because some of the circles I'm in, you have unbelieving believers, and then you've got just what I call black pill. And it's so far extremes. And your book was just such a balance. And so anyway, I just want to dive in and talk about this. But you're a nephrologist. So what prompted you to write almost a 400-page book on UAPs, UFOs, and stuff like that? What sparked your interest in the phenomena? Because, I mean, you talk about in the book that you've been interested in this for years. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I've always had an interest in this subject. I wrote a report, I believe it was in grade school, maybe 4th or 5th grade, where we were supposed to write a report. Most people in my class chose mundane topics, but I chose UFOs. So I think that tells you that I've always been interested in the subject. I remember my grandmother used to tell me about the haunted house that she lived in, and I just always found this information fascinating. So about 6 years ago, I started my other book, Seeing the Messiah, where I talked about, I wanted to look at apparitions and whether or not objective apparitions could explain Jesus' post-resurrection appearances. And somewhere, maybe halfway through that, I got onto this Men in Black topic. Hilary Evans, one of the authors in parapsychology, talked about this, and I'm thinking, well, that could be relevant. So by the time I realized what happened, I forgot a couple years later, how is it that I've gotten so immersed in ufology? But it started out with studying the Men in Black and kind of led to other aspects of the UFO world. And I more or less wrote that book roughly the same time as Seeing the Messiah. And I think that's probably the best way to explain how this came about.
Wow. Yeah, it's phenomenal. So, all right, you talk about that you had a personal experience that actually kind of baptized you into this. Tell us about this, actually, it was through your grandfather's experience in West Virginia. Tell us about that story.
Yeah, so I believe, I couldn't remember at the time of writing whether he and his coworkers were on the way home or from work or on the way to work. I think it was on the way back from work. They were driving down a Lincoln County, West Virginia road, very desolate, rural area, total dark, middle of the night because they worked a late shift. And they were on an elevated road and overlooking kind of into the valley. They saw just a red globe, almost just a red sphere that was just hovering there. Wasn't making sound. It was just there. It was clearly something anomalous. So they got out of their car to watch it for a while. It didn't move. Nothing happened. And they said, let's see if we can get a better look at it. We need to drive down the road a little bit further. As they got back into the car and drove back down, the site was blocked by vegetation, trees, other things. And when they got to a clearing where they could see into the valley, it turned out it had moved on. Whatever this red globe was, it had disappeared. My grandfather told me that story. He saw it with 3 other people, and it was just a baffling phenomenon for them.
Well, I mean, this is none of my questions, but I just want to ask you: have you had a personal experience with UFOs or UAPs?
I've not, though. Interestingly enough, shortly before this book started the editing phase, my wife and I went up to New York to watch a Knicks game. And while we were here, we had my sister-in-law come, and she spends the night and watches our cats and dogs, and kind of cat sits, dog sits. And while she was here, she was letting them out. It was late at night, and she said that there was some cylindrical object that passed above the tree line. She said it was only about 20 feet above the tree line out back, above the forested area, and it was totally silent, emitted a bluish-white glow, and just kept the same trajectory all the way east to west until it was out of sight.
Wow.
And she's got a degree in forestry, and she likes to observe atmospheric events like meteor showers and things like that. So she's unlikely to be one that's going to see a satellite or a meteor and think it's a UFO. And she said she was spooked enough by the event that she stayed out there for 20 minutes to make sure there wasn't some kind of non-human intelligence emerged from the tree line. Thankfully, there wasn't.
Wow. You know,
So,
there's something to what you're talking about there. It's like there's this innateness, and we can get more into this when we get to the metaphysics, the psychology behind this. There's this innateness. It's not just a sensory phenomena when people experience this stuff. They have I'm going to use the word, a spiritual type engagement or a ethereal, something outside our normal, like you say, dualistic way of looking at the world. And that's interesting that she kind of hung around. It made her creeped out.
yes.
So what was the deal clincher for you? What event or what story or what research did you make the transition from being this could be misidentifications and folklore to being that you believe that this is a real phenomena?
I think it was probably a gradual process. I don't think there was any true aha moment, Brandon, for me. I went into it obviously quite open-minded. The reality was 4 years ago, I didn't know for sure. I could have seen a world where I would have looked into this material and came away not being impressed. But I think the shocking thing was for me, it was not that there was a residual of evidential cases, but that the evidence was just so overwhelming. J. Allen Hynek, decades ago, and there's been a lot more stuff happened since he said this, he said rightly of this material that we've got an embarrassment of riches when it comes to the evidential nature of it.
Yeah, I mean, I listen to Coast every weekend. And where I am, the radio station, they'll have Art Bell's Somewhere in Time. So I'll go back and even, God, that's probably 30 years ago, some of his shows back in the 90s. It just blows me away. Even then, the evidence that they had for a lot of this kind of stuff. And I mean, you could probably even go back further into the 70s and 60s, the evidence that they had. So, yeah, I understand exactly what I'm the same way. I mean, if you would have gotten me probably in 2013 or 14, I would have thought all this was bupkis, from Bigfoot to Dogman to UAPs and UFOs to all of that. I mean, I wasn't red pilled. And honestly, it was right before Trump got elected is when I really got red pilled with some stuff. And then I started questioning everything, started going down that path of what else, not just biblically, because I got introduced to the Nephilim and the divine council type worldview and all that kind of stuff, but there's just high strangeness and all that. And I used to make fun of people that believed in Bigfoot, and now I get made fun of, and it's really funny. So it's sort of like a baptism. Do you feel like you like the classic story of C.S. Lewis? He got in the vehicle with his brother, and he got in an atheist, and he ended the ride as a theist. Is that what it's kind of been like to you? Kind of a baptism of just the evidence?
I think you could say that. I wasn't surprised that I thought an objective study of this phenomenon led to belief in it. I wasn't really surprised that there's evidence for it. It's just the immense amount of the material. Just to give you an indication, Brandon, Project Blue Book, that was a government project that examined UFO, UAP cases back from about 1952 up through 1969. And generally speaking, it came and went, but they looked at it very skeptically. And at the end, Edward Condon, who was definitely had a skeptical bent, he said that whatever these things are, he didn't say they didn't exist, UFOs, but he said that they weren't a threat to national security and that they should not be studied. However, when we look at the evidence, there are, even by the most conservative skeptical count, there were 500 plus cases out of the 12,000 that they looked at that were deemed unknown, i.e., by definition, a UFO. So even Project Blue Book, which terminated in 1970, 1969, says that they acknowledged 500 UFOs. And it's important to point out, these are cases that had very solid evidence. You're talking about multiple witnesses, trained observers, maybe military, maybe commercial airline pilots, police officers, craft that were seen by multiple angles, craft that had multi-sensor data like maybe radar returns that couldn't easily be explained. Let's say if I were driving down the road and I reported to Blue Book, I saw this mysterious white light in the sky. It was rainy, the visibility wasn't good, but I don't know what it was. And then within seconds, it disappeared. If they took that seriously at all to even look at it, they would call that insufficient data, which was a different category than unknown. So Edwin Ruppel, who I hope I'm pronouncing that name correctly, he coined the term UFO back in the 1950s, and he wrote a book in 1956, which I think still holds relevance to this day, talking about the evidence up until that point. He gave an example of an unknown, and you look at all the data behind it, a case that had a lot of data for it, in favor of it, and for which a prosaic explanation couldn't be had. He argues, I think rightly, that the chances that all of these can be explained in a prosaic matter quickly approaches zero once you multiply these kinds of cases. And Blue Book, it bears repeating, had 500 plus of these, even by the most conservative count.
Wow. That just blows me away. It's almost like a best kept secret, all the evidence behind this. In one side of the media, you have them wanting to disclose, but then the other side, they're hiding a lot of the evidence. It's like there's been this tug of war for years. Have you noticed that?
No, 100%. And it's frustrating too. I think writing now, the stigma may not be as large as it was even 10 years ago, before that New York Times article dropped by Leslie Kane and Ralph Blumenthal, talked about the Tic Tac UAP in 2004. But it is frustrating because we know we're right, because we've looked at the data, and yet there's going to be people that just scoffs at it and thinks we're crazy for even talking about it or believing in it. And that's a little frustrating. So it would be nice if the stigma would go away, but I'm not holding my breath on that.
Well, this leads to one of my questions perfectly. For someone out there who's never seriously looked into UFOs or UAPs, what do you consider the strongest evidence that there is a genuine phenomena that deserves scientific investigation?
If I were to point to sources, I would say all the government material. I think that would be the main thing. Realize that in the last 3 years, there have been 3 congressional hearings on this.
Yeah.
It's a bipartisan issue now. There are prominent Democrats and prominent Republicans that are taking this seriously, including Marco Rubio, who is our current Secretary of State, Chuck Schumer on the other side of the aisle, who was Senate Minority Leader now, was Senate Majority Leader, his predecessor, Harry Reid. Then you got congressmen and women like Tim Burchett out of Tennessee, Anna Paulina Luna out of Florida. I would say that. And if you're really open-minded and want to take some time to study it, I really think the book's by Jim Lukatsky. The first 2 were co-authored by Colin Kelleher and George Knapp. And then his last 2 were just authored by himself. But starting with Skinwalkers at the Pentagon and that series, look into that. And if you really want an interesting read, maybe if I were to pick out one book that gives the best evidence, it would be UFOs and Nukes by Robert Hastings. He interviewed 160 plus military men and women, veterans, who saw these things, and where these UAPs would have incursions over nuclear facilities. You read that book, and then in his most recent book, Confession, he talks about there's actually been hundreds of declassified government documents attesting this. So in a sense, even the government, while they might want to be quiet about it in some sectors, their very documents acknowledge that this phenomenon exists. I think that would be my 2-minute spiel on that.
Yeah, because that's something that I've discovered in getting into this whole, I guess, world is people say, well, I don't trust the government. Well, I understand that, but at the same time, the government is not a monolithic entity. It's so compartmentalized on purpose. And you have good people that want the truth out there, just like you have shady people that don't want to get it out. And whoever they are, they are there, but there's still, good people there. And this whole world was just amazing to me. And that's something I've been noticing in this circle is a real flattening out of when everything came out in the past month or so. And there was that rumored thing of this group of pastors that were approached by someone in the government. You heard about all that kind of stuff. And it was a, and everybody's like, oh, well, if you don't believe that aliens are demons, then, we'll get to that later on in the podcast. But it was like this real flattening out. And what I loved about your book, and I think your book needs to be on the list of the ones you recommended, definitely as a primer, but it's more than that, is because you explore all these different issues and you try to come to what I believe is a synthesis, which we'll get to also in the show, of actually where I tend to sit. But so diving into it, we've seen a lot of whistleblowers, congressional hearings, increased government transparency. Are we moving toward disclosure, or are we simply seeing another just cycle of public interest? What do you think about that?
What I worry about, Brandon, is especially with some of these whistleblowers that have come out, you probably know some of the names of people. They make some really interesting claims. I hope they're telling the truth. I don't have any reason to believe that they're not offhand, except I worry that this could be some kind of psyop. Jacques Vallée wrote a book called Revelations back in 1991. That's when his first edition was published. But he talks about how the government would come to these ufologists and say, hey, we got the goods. Why don't you make a big show of this, and we'll deliver you these documents, and you could have disclosure. So these kinds of shenanigans have happened before. I'm kind of worried that might be what we're heading for now. Jim Lukatsky, who I had mentioned, the author that had written those books as a part of the OSAP program recently, he says that some of the people that have testified before Congress are lying. He said at least one person is.
Wow.
He wouldn't say who it was, but I think we're definitely going the right direction.
Yeah.
Since 2017, I love all the interest in the subject. Are we going to have true disclosure? Is Trump or someone else going to come out and say, "Hey, we're not alone, and this is what we know"? I'm still a little skeptical of that.
Well, to me, it's been a big troll. He's been having all these pictures that leak out with him meeting with these Nordics, and then pictures, of him paralleling illegal aliens with immigrants with aliens, and the whole, was it alien.gov or whatever? Anyway, so it's almost like this tongue-in-cheek troll that you wonder, well, I'm going to disclose aliens, and then, it's about immigrants. Or it's just wild. So I'm like you. I kind of question the direction that this is going.
So in addition to that, Brandon, there's a lot of salacious claims out there.
Yeah, we're going to get to we'll get to that. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Because I think that's crucial to this whole, to have a balanced look. We have to talk about that. But before we go into that, because I have a really interesting question I want to ask you that might take a little while to unpack. Let's talk about the different categories that you came up with and how you came up with them. Let me see how you worded it. I want to get them correct here. You have extraterrestrial, which is the one we've usually heard over all these years. You have extradimensional, and then you have, I guess, what would be an occult spiritual type dimension, or would it just be those two categories that you would have?
I would say those three categories could be separate, although for readers of the book, I do kind of coalesce those latter two. at the end as part of my best guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, so extraterrestrials mean what I understand it to mean, I guess anything off the Earth is extraterrestrial, even if it comes some parallel dimension, you could call it extraterrestrial. But what I mean by that is that the aliens come from somewhere in our galaxy, maybe outside of it. They come somewhere from the home universe, which that opens up a lot of possibilities. The extra-dimensional hypothesis would mean they come from some parallel universe or reality, which science hasn't proved that such a thing exists, but I think you could make a decent argument for it. And that would be the distinction. And the occult/spiritual hypothesis would be that maybe not only do they come from some parallel reality, but they come from some what we would typically call spiritual realm, the same denizens as angels and demons.
Yeah. So let's unpack that. I guess we need to go back even further. We tackle those categories because I want to go deeper into that. Let's talk about how you kind of we're kind of getting away from Descartes', dualistic. I think it was Descartes, wasn't it? That I think
yes.
Therefore, yeah, and into a more what's the wording that you use, to a more synthesized way of looking at the world, reality?
Right. So I'm not a philosopher. So
right,
my mistake to all the philosophers out there if I get this wrong, but my understanding of Cartesian dualism is essentially you got the world of the physical or the material and the world of the mental/spiritual.
Yeah.
And those two generally don't mix. Right. I take more of what I call a bridge view called dual aspect monism, where the spiritual world and the physical world, while they're two different aspects of reality, they tend to merge in ways that substance or Cartesian dualism doesn't necessarily.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's overlap there. I mean, you even go back to I'm thinking about it from a biblical perspective, where I tend to look at things. I mean, even Eden, and I just did a podcast with my co-host on liminality and liminal spaces, and that monism that you're talking about there gives some overlap, and you even did that with when we'll get to with your answer, your conclusion of what you drew, and I think that's crucial. Because so often we've looked at the world with certain spectacles, and I think we need a new pair of glasses. We need a new prescription, and I think you come at it with that prescription, and that's what I was talking about with the flattening of it. And I get why people do that, because we think in sound bites nowadays. We're the age of social media, and so it's easier to say, alien bad or alien good or whatever. And we don't want to dive into the intricacies and the nuances that you do in your book and stuff. What is the strongest evidence for the extraterrestrial, in your opinion, of everything you talk about in your book, just for that perspective?
What's primarily interesting to me, a lot of those that go against the nuts and bolts interpretation of UAPs or the extraterrestrial hypothesis say that these craft perform abilities or maneuvers that are physically impossible. Well, some of the astrophysicists recently have taken that idea to task, and they've shown in some of these recent books, like Initial Revelations by Lukatsky et al., they've written all these papers interesting speculations on how you can reconcile what they've been seen to do with physics. And you could take that all the way back to what I find interesting is these same observables go back even to some of the 1940s, 1950s sightings. So it's consistent across these different independent observations over time.
Quantum mechanics has thrown a lot of this out the window. I mean, quantum physics, right? That's the deal breaker there in a lot of ways, or the deal changer, so to speak, right?
Oh, absolutely. And I wonder, a lot of these rocket scientists that have speculated on it, like Lukatsky, Eric Davis, Hal Puthoff, they talk about reconciling this with general relativity, which, of course, it can't contradict relativity, but I do wonder if there's a quantum mechanical aspect of this, because these craft are seen to disappear. And if you can isolate yourself from the environment to the point where, and I mean total isolation, where you're blocking thermal radiation, air molecules, photons. If you're blocking photons, that means you're invisible. If these craft can do that, they can go into a quantum superposition of multiple states. So I wonder if these crafts through advanced technology are doing that somehow. I don't see that mentioned in the literature much, but I think it's a possibility these scientists should explore.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. I mean, that's where I geek out. I love my two favorite things right now are quantum mechanics and quantum physics and neuroscience and how they tie together, which comes into consciousness and all that kind of stuff, which I want to get into with the perception, the observable thing that we can talk about. But so what about the extra dimensional type hypothesis? What made you land in your perspective of all this? What made you land there? And you can go ahead and just disclose to us. They'll read it in the book, but what is your perspective and what made you land there?
I think backing up just a minute to the extraterrestrial hypothesis, the other evidence would be just the overtly physical aspects of it. These things land, they leave tracings. There's some evidence, I think, that we've actually recovered a craft. My confidence level would be a little above 50% on that.
Yeah.
Although there's a lot of smoke on that, but no actual fire that I've seen. These things will short out vehicles. They've caused harm to recipients. Jacques Vallée says that there have been 900 plus documented instances of harm. That is usually in the form of some kind of radiation poisoning, or so it appears.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so I think that would be just a survey of the evidence for a pure nuts and bolts extraterrestrial hypothesis. As far as interdimensional, you get into the high strangeness aspect of it.
Right.
People that encounter these things going all the way back to Kenneth Arnold, 1947, which put flying saucers on the map. They would report orbs in their houses afterwards, these mysterious aspects, waking up to these shadowy beings over their bed, poltergeist kinds of effects.
Yeah.
Visitations from these men in black, which seem to be these sinister entities that in some cases are probably government, but in some cases seem more spectral in nature to me.
Yeah.
The high strangeness aspect of it is what makes me lean more interdimensional with an aspect of the occult mixed in.
Yeah, and this would be a great time to go into the salaciousness of different things. If you were going to have criteria, Jonathan, and you were a ufologist and you were studying all this, somebody came at you with an abduction story or somebody came in with you an encounter story, what criteria would you use to sort out? Well, I mean, even then you have different categories. Would have somebody that was mistaken, like it was they saw the wrong thing, but then you have people I'm going to use that are mentally dealing with things. Nut jobs would be my optimal unrefined word that I would use. That are attention seekers and trying to get this, because we see this in other areas that I'm familiar with too. People trying to get attention. And so, what would be the criteria that you would begin to sort through some of this stuff? And it would be different with extraterrestrials than it probably would be with extradimensional, right?
Right. You'd want to look for evidence of psychopathology, for sure. Yeah. As you mentioned, schizophrenia, those that are prone to hallucinations. Yeah, I know in a skeptical piece, Kevin Randall and a couple of his co-authors, Estes and Cohn, they wrote a book called The Abduction Enigma, which is more of a skeptical take on this whole thing.
Yeah.
They said that this lady's abductions were healed by taking Prozac, which is an antidepressant. So that would tend to make you think that that probably wasn't real. So you look for evidence of psychopathology. I would be more confident by somebody that was in clearly an awake state that had this experience, because if they weren't, it could have been a hypnagogic or a hypnopompic hallucination. It could have been sleep paralysis. I believe that explains a lot of the modern day cases.
Yeah.
People that were taken from their cars, that's more believable. And then, especially if you have multiple witness cases, what really sold me on the objectivity of some of these cases is that 10 to 20% of the case literature occurred to 2 or more people simultaneously. So the more of those aspects you have, the more I'm inclined to think something anomalous probably did occur.
Well, let's dive in deeper there, because this ties in with your first book that we did about the resurrection, and we talked about Fatima and the different encounters or apparitions and stuff. So you talk about this in your book. Go into what that phenomena is and how it works.
You mean like psi, super psi? Yeah. So I unpack that some in chapters 3, 16, and 17. It's whenever someone has an encounter, something anomalous, like it could be an encounter with an angel or an apparition of a deceased loved one,
right?
Or an angelic encounter, so forth, or alien abduction, we think of, well, this is some other entity. This is some other party. This is something, either whether you say it's a benevolent or a malevolent entity, this is something that's come and we've interacted with it. Well, there's evidence that you can call it our higher selves or our subliminal selves. That's the way it was referred to in the psychical literature, that we are capable of producing these things. It's been done deliberately, apparitions, and it's been done, I would argue, inadvertently as well. So you could argue that all religious experience, I don't believe this, but you could argue that all of these experiences are just manifestations of our individual and collective consciousness.
Yeah, my answer to that, which I agree with you totally, it's a both and. It doesn't have to be an either or. You know, it could be a connection with the spirit world and reality there, but it can also be some sort of superside phenomena too. And that's what I loved about your old book, is that how you would stand on that some of the apparitions probably weren't real, but then, you know, Jesus' resurrection would be an apparition type experience, or could be, and it's actually wasn't. So kind of dive into that. It can be, we want to make it an either or, but it could be both, right?
Absolutely. I think it is both. I think there are non-human intelligences, and I will say the phenomenon I just described it's called super psi or living agent psi in the literature, and it really throws a spanner in the works. It makes it difficult to tease all this out. But you have to take it on a case-by-case basis, but I do believe it's a both and. It doesn't have to be neither or.
Yeah, and we as, you know, like I said earlier, we as human beings, we want to make everything so easy and cut and dried, and just reality is just not like that. That's when we have a mutual friend, Matt McGuire. That's what I love about talking with him and engaging with him, is that he doesn't flatten. I'm using that term a lot, but I see it in our society. We flatten everything out. We want everything to be this or this, and there could be 12 different options there. And so that's what I enjoyed about your book, is because, like I said, I'm used to the culture I'm in. You know, aliens are always demons, and that's not necessarily the case. Just like, you know, angels are not always demons, and we won't get into all that. But there's such a nuance when it comes to the unseen realm and all this kind of stuff, and we just want to flatten it to I guess to wrap our brains around it. And I love the fact that you didn't do that. You know, you categorized and went areas that I think Christians need to hear.
Yeah, and if you want my most mind-boggling, what really blew me away and shocks me, I think even to this day, Brandon, I agree to you see a lot of Christian circles, prominent ones, saying that aliens are demons. I think even the vice president made a comment to that effect lately. That is at best a gross oversimplification. And you get into the abduction phenomenon. The one that I detail is in the book is arguably the most disturbing that I've seen. It happened here in my backyard in Kentucky.
Yeah.
To 3 ladies. A lot of other people that report having had abductions, while they are very traumatic in nature, oddly enough, there's pretty good data to suggest that eventually these people take these as positive encounters, despite the fact that they were initially very traumatic. So, and what do you do with that? And these people, they'll have, it's like they get supercharged psychic abilities afterwards. They'll claim the ability to heal. Many of these people will claim that they are healed of diseases, some of which surpasses our current medical technology.
Right.
Yeah, I know Preston Dennett's a ufologist that's looked into this, and he calls UFOs floating hospitals. So there's definitely a benevolent, and more importantly, I don't want to leave this out. A lot of these people are changed for the better. They are more compassionate. They're more altruistic in the aftermath of this, and they give up self-destructive behaviors. Unless we want to argue that the devil is in the let's make people better people business, which turns a big part of our theology on its head.
Exactly.
You can't say that this whole phenomenon, even the harrowing stuff like abductions, is necessarily demonic.
Well, and two, where this goes, I mean, I like to think logically. I guess that's a flaw in today's society, but you know, there's this logical fallacy, and I'm going to get it wrong, but it has to do with falsifying things, you know. And if your idea can't be falsified, then there's a very real possibility that it's not true. And what a lot of people would say with that, well, Yeah, they're doing good things to deceive them, to pull them away from God and all that. It to me, it sounds like there's a lot of, and I'm not going to go into the nitty gritty here, but there's a lot of conspiracies out here that there's always an answer. There's always an answer. If we didn't go to the moon, well, that's because NASA has this massive conspiracy, and we didn't. And there's always an answer, and there's no ability for something to be falsified, which in a logical way of thinking immediately discredits it. And I don't think people realize that. And anyway, I think that's wrong. I think it's, fallacious arguing and fallacious ways of thinking. But you'd be surprised. And like that's more the black pill crowd is what I like to call it. I'm seeing it politically now in different areas. There's always an answer for different things and stuff. And so I want to be careful when we're in this world to begin to think objectively. I don't want to deify science. We learned through COVID that science itself can have a religion dimension to it. But I told somebody just the other day on Facebook, you have to realize that theology at one time was the queen of sciences. I mean, so looking at the world through a scientific worldview and a logical worldview does not automatically discredit the spiritual and experiential. It goes back to the both and versus the either or. And that's so great. I love this about your book. Now, I want to go here for a few minutes. If I kind of drew this together with some of the different people that jumped out at me in your book. So if you were sitting across the table, all right, with Jacques Vallée, Gary Nolan, Diana Pasulka, and some traditional Christian theologian of your choice, what do you think each one of them would get right? And what do you think that they're still missing in the true nature of this phenomena? I mean, we could spend 20 minutes here, but just, talk as long as you want.
I think Pasulka and Vallée are more on the right track. In fact, and then you could even add John Keel to that list. They argue that this is some kind of extra-dimensional phenomenon. Keel and Vallée, in places we even call it, I've even heard them refer to as demonology even. They said Vallée in some of his forbidden science books says that he can understand why Christians refer to it as demons, because especially the stuff on Skinwalker Ranch, how that seems to have been, at least at one point, quite malevolent in nature. He doesn't ultimately buy the Christian argument. He's not a Christian, but I find that interesting. And then, of course, I don't want to make it sound like I'm contradicting what I said earlier. There seems to be a benevolent component to this as well. So I think they're on the right track, especially Vallée. I'm a little more familiar with his work than Pasulka's. Who was the other one you mentioned?
Gary Nolan.
Gary Nolan. Yeah. I'm not sure if he's of the extraterrestrial hypothesis or extra-dimensional or...
I think he's extraterrestrial.
Okay. So I would probably say Vallée, and if that's the case, Vallée and Pasulka, I would agree more with them, but I think both sides get a lot right.
Yeah. Are there any theologians or Christian scholars out there that you think get this right, that don't, ascribe everything to either demons or everything just to evolutionary science?
Dale Allison would probably be the closest to that I know of.
Yeah. Yeah, good
right.
stuff.
He was kind enough he's one of the top New Testament scholars in the world, so I'm very humbled that he was willing to endorse both of these books. And he's open to the subject. As far as New Testament scholars go, he's really a population of one when it comes to taking apparition seriously. That really needs to change if we're going to keep up, I think, in the New Testament scholarly world. Yeah, and I can tell you in personal conversations with him, he's very open to the UAP phenomenon as well. I think we would agree on far more than we disagree on.
That's fascinating. I mean, I don't doubt it. That's great. He's incredible. So after all your research, after all is said and done, what would you want the average person that would read your book? Because it's definitely, I mean, it's meaty, but yet it's still very accessible to the average, layman type. That's what I enjoyed about it. What would you want them to walk away understanding about this UFO phenomena? What would you want them to know about reality, about spirituality, and our place in the universe? Just kind of summarize there.
I think UFOs are real. I think the evidence that they're physical and yet they have some kind of extra-dimensional component needs to be taken as a reality, and we need to think about what we do with this. If this technology can be harnessed or replicated, it could be revolutionary in the scientific world. You know, these cures that happen on these UFOs or in association with UFOs that are real,
Hmm.
how do they do it? It could lead to revolutionary breakthroughs in medicine, not to mention interstellar exploration, communications. We need to get back to our spiritual roots. Western philosophy has done so much good for the world, but scientific materialism has allowed us to leave that aspect of behind.
Yeah.
And it is to our detriment. We need to get that back, and we need to take it seriously and include that as part of our scientific pursuits.
Yeah, it was for years in the church. I mean, science came out of the church. A lot of people don't realize that. So,
Yeah,
well,
absolutely.
let's take a little rabbit trail detour. I want to talk about the whole Jinn and fairy aspect that you talk about in your book. Let's go there. So, tell us about that and how that got introduced into the whole UAP phenomena to you.
Right. And that kind of gets me that I use that maybe subtly as more evidence for the extra dimensional phenomenon that so people in the Middle East, when they have like say haunted houses or a lot of paranormal activities, they'll commonly blame it on jinn. And this goes back even before Islam. It goes back to ancient Arabia. And then in Celtic countries, you've got fairies. People will have reported these fairy encounters. And while the evidence for that is not necessarily as compelling, because it goes back so far, so much further back in time, a lot of these encounters that have been written about. That's not to say that there are not evidential encounters, but you'll find that this whole kidnap narrative,
Mm-hmm.
where people are taken away temporarily to this other realm, it's put in very different cultural context than an extraterrestrial encounter is. You know, so for fairy encounters, people will be in this subterranean realm. It'll be lit by some unseen source of light, just like people that are abducted. They'll say the interior is lit, but they can't tell what by. There's not an obvious light source. Sometimes they come away healed by the process. Sometimes they have paranormal proclivities and abilities, or at least they claim that afterwards.
Right.
So this goes back way before people have ever reported near-death experiences or UFO abductions. It goes back to fairy encounters and jinn encounters, and I would even throw in shamanic trance journeys as well.
Mm.
This is a very, very common narrative, and I go into that about 2/3 of the way, I think, through the book. I have a chapter where this narrative, while in a very different cultural guise, seems to have precedent for it in the past.
Yeah, it's almost like it's a template you can put over the UAP phenomena like a glove. It's fascinating. I was thinking about, fairy circles and crop circles, and I was thinking about fairy circles were used for interdimensional transportation, and then I think, is it up near your area, the Devil's Circle, or that was it? It's a phenomena where there's this patch of land where nothing grows. I think it's up towards Kentucky. It might be in Tennessee, but there's this. It's I forget what the exact wording of it, but it's a patch of ground that nothing grows, and they can't figure out why. And it reminded me of the same fairy type thing, which reminds me of the UAP phenomena. So
Yeah, fairy rings or areas where UFOs have been seen to land, and when they take off, that like you say, that patch of land is different. It doesn't quite grow right.
yeah,
There have been books written on this where scientists have taken samples from inside and outside of these rings and analyzed them, and the elemental composition is very different from what it is inside and outside the rings.
yeah, that just blows me away. I mean, and that
Sure.
goes back to why I think your way of looking at reality, going from the Cartesian way of looking at things to more monism, is crucial because it explains how we can have both spiritual and physical overlap. Like I have envisioned like a Venn diagram, how the two overlap, and then that inside group is the unseen realm where those two intersect. That I think that is a great way to look at this whole UAP and UFO phenomena.
Right. And there's a surprising, I don't talk about this in the book, but there's a surprising amount of biblical evidence for this dual aspect monist view that I embrace now. So take a look at Abraham's visitors in Genesis 18 and 19. He had visitors from angelic beings or what appeared to be. One of them appeared to be divine.
God.
God
Yeah.
himself. And they would eat both in chapter 18 and 19. There's a part in chapter 19 where the assailants come for these visitors and they're able to grab Lot, who's trying to confront these people, and they're pulled back. And you've got another meal scene. There's the implication there that Lot was able to wash their feet. And then you've got what I would argue is something of an ancient UAP encounter when Elijah was taken up in the whirlwind, and there was the chariot of fire and the horses of fire, the spectral horses, when he was taken up in the whirlwind of heaven. Well, that was a real physical effect. He was displaced, and he wasn't seen again on earth, as far as we know, until the transfiguration. What would that have been, 1,000 years later, give or take? So that's interesting. You could argue that could have been like an ancient UAP sighting. That might be to an ancient mind, what chariots of fire might be something like what you would expect to see.
Yeah. I actually have a friend who, we did a podcast on this, believes that the transfiguration event is actually extradimensional in the sense of Moses, Elijah, and Jesus all met from their respective times on that mountain together. That's why he was transfigured, which is really fascinating. That throws time travel into the whole thing, in which we don't have time to go into today. With another fascinating thing, thinking about this UAP thing, quantum physics has really introduced the possibility, even though I still am very skeptical of it, of time travel.
Yeah, and part of the speculation is if it's technologically feasible to warp or manipulate the space-time metric, then all bets are off. Time travel suddenly may be possible.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, and that just, wow. That is a mind-blowing thing, because I'm a Star Trek guy, and I love the temporal directive or whatever about time travel, and I watch Voyager a lot, and Janeway always violates it and stuff, and so, but the whole paradoxes of time travel just blow me away. Well, if everybody wants to connect with you and wants to, obviously they'll get your book. Give us your deets, if you will.
Sure. At Kendall MD is my X handle. That's probably the best place to follow me, and I have a link to the website there as well.
Well, I love this conversation. This is so cool. I mean, I love this book, and I recommend everybody out there to go out and pick up a copy of it. Are you going to have an Audible version, perhaps, of it?
Thankfully, yes. I can't tell you the number of people that have come up to me and said, if there's an Audible, I'll read it. So I'm actually working on getting an Audible version of my last book too.
I can't wait to get this out here, because this is such an interesting, and it's so apropos for where we're going right now and what's going on with this closure. Have you seen the movie, by the way? Have you seen the Spielberg movie? What did you think about it?
I saw it about a week ago. I enjoyed it. I thought Spielberg did a really good job. And honestly, even outside of all the UFO stuff and disclosure, it was just a good story. I just enjoyed the ride. So he takes more of an extraterrestrial view. At least that seems to be the case.
Yeah.
I will say it might have been predictably anticlimactic at the end a little bit, which how could it not be, unless we believe that the government gave Spielberg a bunch of new revelations. A movie like this is kind of doomed to be. But no, I'd recommend a watch. I don't endorse everything he says. I certainly, some of the stuff about it challenging Christianity, I'm not seeing that at all.
Yeah.
I don't think Christians have anything to be worried about, but it's a good movie. I'd recommend it.
Yeah. Well, it's a boogeyman out in the Christian circles, and I'm like, why? I mean, if it's a bad movie, I could see it. If it's not a well-acted movie, yeah, but I just don't foresee it being.
Right.
Whether you like Spielberg or not, he's an excellent movie director.
Yeah, absolutely. And we do need to get away from the whole, as Christians, we need to get away from the whole UFOs or demons equation. That's at best partially correct.
Yeah. Yep, there's too many instances of benevolence, and it could be like spiritual beings, but it doesn't have to necessarily be malevolent or demonic. So I mean, that's my 2 cents, and I think that when we flatten, like I said again, when we flatten everything like that, we limit ourselves at really nuancing and seeing what really is going on in the unseen realm and what's going on in the world. All right, I'll give you the last word. So what would you want everybody out there to know to take away from this podcast?
Be open-minded, especially if you're a theist. Be consistent. The Bible talks about exorcising demons. It talks about people rising from the dead, including our Lord and Savior. It talks about miracles, healings. They didn't stop in the first century. Acknowledge that the spiritual world is still very much with us. The evidence is there. Be open-minded to it.
Yeah. Cool. Well, thank you so much again, Jonathan. I appreciate you coming on the show.
You're welcome, and thank you very much for having me.
Thanks for listening and supporting us. And remember, stay naturally supernatural.